Brenda was never one to raise her voice. At 34, her brown eyes hid a weariness few noticed. She lived with Guilherme, her husband of 7 years, in an apartment that once vibrated with love, but now became the scene of sharp silences. He called her a gold digger mockingly, with smiles that hurt more than insults. Guilherme had changed. Once a devoted partner, he now refused to help with the bills, leaving everything to Brenda. The financial and emotional burden fell on her, but no one knew. She supported the household alone, while he spent his money on nights out with friends. Brenda swallowed the criticism, maintaining her routine as a financial advisor with unwavering discipline. But inside, each snub from Guilherme opened a new wound. How did she bear it? A closely guarded secret kept her strong. What no one saw was that Brenda was about to turn the tables, and Guilherme had no idea what awaited him. Brenda's routine was a precarious balance. She woke at 5:30 a.m., made coffee that Guilherme ignored, and left for work where she shone as a consultant. Her talent for numbers made her indispensable, but at home she was invisible. Guilherme would arrive late, smelling of beer and making flimsy excuses. "You don't understand how hard it is for me," he would say, as she paid off overdue bills. He never asked how she managed. To him, Brenda was just the wife who was lucky to be with him. The nights were worse. He would make sarcastic comments about her easy life while she locked herself in her room to cry silently. His contempt gnawed at her, but Brenda didn't react. Not yet. She recorded every expense, every humiliation, as if building a mental archive. Her colleagues saw her smile, but not the weight she carried. What kept her from exploding? There was something bigger at play, something Guilherme never suspected. Brenda didn't like confrontation, but every word Guilherme said was a blow. "You wouldn't do anything without me," he would say, laughing, as if she were a burden. She remembered the beginning, when he'd supported her, but now there was only disdain. He'd stopped working regularly, citing a lack of opportunities while spending on bars and new clothes. Brenda, on the other hand, masterfully balanced her finances, hiding her real income. She never revealed the $16,000 she earned a month. Why? She knew he'd use it against her, as he did with everything. Her patience was her armor, but it was beginning to crack. Every night, she stared at the ceiling, dreaming of a free future. What held her back? Fear of breaking up, fear of what he'd say to others. But inside her, a spark was growing. She was no longer the naive young woman she'd been 7 years ago. Something was changing, and Guilherme was blind to it. Guilherme's friends began to notice the tension. At dinner parties, he would joke about Brenda being controlling with the money, without mentioning that she was the one paying for everything. She smiled, but her eyes burned. The humiliation was constant, disguised as jokes that everyone laughed at except her. Brenda maintained her facade, but every laugh was a reminder of her loneliness. She thought about how everything had changed since their marriage. Guilherme, once charming, now treated her like an accessory. He didn't see her effort, her exhaustion, or her strength. She guarded her financial secret as an asset, but the emotional cost was high. How much longer could she hold out? The answer was near. A storm was brewing in her chest, and the patience everyone praised was about to turn into something no one, especially Guilherme, could have predicted. Brenda's silence was her greatest weapon, but also her prison. Each comment from Guilherme pushed her further to the edge. He accused her of being dependent, unaware that she was the foundation of the house. She paid the bills, kept the home, while he bragged to friends. Brenda didn't complain, but each night, alone, was an internal scream. She imagined the day she would tell the truth, when his world would crumble. It wasn't yet, but it was coming. Her colleagues praised her competence, but no one saw the woman who, at home, was reduced to nothing. Guilherme's contempt made her question her worth, but deep down she knew who she was. An idea was beginning to take shape, a plan that would change everything. What Guilherme didn't know was that Brenda wasn't just patient, she was strategic, and soon he would discover what she was capable of. Brenda carried the weight of the home on her shoulders, but no one saw it. Her monthly income of over $16,000 as a financial consultant was a carefully guarded secret. While Guilherme accused her of being self-serving, she paid the electricity bills, rent, and even his extravagances, never revealing the truth. At work, she was a star. Her impeccable reports won clients, and her discretion made her trustworthy. But at home, she was just the wife who didn't contribute enough, according to Guilherme. Each bill paid was a silent victory, but also a reminder of her loneliness. Why didn't she tell him? because she knew Guilherme would use her success against her, turning her strength into yet another reason to humiliate her. Brenda recorded every expense, every penny, as if building an invisible castle. Her silence was strategic, but the emotional cost was high. How long could she bear to live that lie? What no one knew was that this secret held the key to her freedom. At the office, Brenda was a fortress. Her colleagues admired her ability to transform numbers into strategies that saved companies. She worked late, reviewing spreadsheets, while Guilherme spent his money at bars, unconcerned about tomorrow. He never asked how she paid the bills, assuming someone took care of everything. Brenda let him believe it. Every dollar she earned was a reminder of her independence, but also of her imprisonment. She hid her paychecks, deflected questions, maintaining the facade of a submissive wife. Inside, anger grew. Each comment he made about her uselessness was a blow, but also fuel. She imagined the day the truth would come out, when his castle of lies would crumble. But it wasn't time yet. Brenda needed more time, more strength. Her secret was her armor, and she polished it silently, waiting for the right moment to use it. The tension at home was suffocating. Guilherme would arrive with new clothes, bought with the card Brenda paid for, and still criticize her for doing nothing. She listened silently as she washed the dishes he'd left piling up. Her mind, however, was elsewhere. On the spreadsheets, the contracts, the future she was building alone. Her $16,000 a month was more than double what Guilherme earned in his best months. But he never knew. Brenda kept every receipt, every statement, as evidence of a crime he never imagined he was committing. She knew that revealing her income would change the dynamic, but it would also expose her to his manipulation. So she waited. Each night, while he slept, she reviewed her plans, dreaming of the day she would no longer have to pretend. The weight of supporting everything alone exhausted her, but it also strengthened her. Brenda was preparing for something bigger, something Guilherme could never have foreseen. Guilherme's friends were unwitting accomplices. At dinner parties, he joked about Brenda controlling the money, while she served the dinner she'd paid for with her own sweat. No one questioned, no one suspected. She smiled, but her eyes hid a storm. Every laugh from her friends was a reminder that no one saw the truth. Brenda knew her secret was her greatest weapon, but also her greatest burden. Supporting the household alone made her feel proud, but also angry. Why did she need to hide? Why did she have to protect Guilherme's facade? The answer lay in control. He thought he dominated her, but she was the one holding the reins. Each bill paid was proof of her strength, but also a reminder of her loneliness. Brenda began planning her exit, but she needed everything to be perfect. The moment of truth was approaching, and she was ready to make Guilherme eat his words. Brenda knew her secret couldn't stay hidden forever. Each day was a test of patience, but also of strategy. She kept statements, client emails, and work awards, all in a locked folder on her computer. Guilherme never suspected. To him, Brenda was just his wife who got by. But she didn't. She shone. Her $16,000 was the result of sleepless nights, tough negotiations, and a talent he never appreciated. With each humiliation, she pushed closer to the brink. His contempt fueled her determination. She didn't just want out of the marriage, she wanted him to understand the mistake he'd made. The plan was taking shape, and Brenda felt the spark of her revolt growing. What Guilherme didn't know was that her secret wasn't just financial, it was the power to rebuild her life, to turn things around, and she was ready to play. The evening seemed ordinary, but it would be the trigger. Brenda and Guilherme were at dinner with friends, a rare moment when she allowed herself to relax. The table was full, laughter echoed, but Guilherme had other plans. Between one joke and another, he launched the punchline, "Brenda's only with me because she's poor and has nowhere else to go." Silence fell like a stone. All eyes turned to her, waiting for a reaction. Brenda felt the blood rush to her face, humiliation burning like fire. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. He laughed as if it were a joke, but the venom in his words was clear. The friends, uncomfortable, changed the subject, but the damage was done. Brenda fought back tears, but inside her something snapped. Years of patience, of supporting the household, of swallowing contempt, it all came to the surface. That night, she decided, there would be no more silence. Guilherme didn't know it, but he had just lit the spark that would destroy her world. The drive home was a nightmare. In the car, Guilherme acted as if nothing had happened, talking about dinner as if it were a success. Brenda stared out the window, the city lights blurred by the tears she refused to let fall. The word poor echoed in her mind, every syllable a reminder of how he saw her. She, who paid every bill, Every dinner, every whim of his, was reduced to a cruel joke. The humiliation wasn't just the words but the audience. Friends she considered close, who laughed without question. Brenda felt the loneliness weigh more heavily than ever, but deep down, anger began to take shape. She wasn't poor, nor weak, nor dependent. Every penny of the $16,000 she earned proved it. As Guilherme drove, oblivious, she began to hatch a plan. There would be no more pretense. The mask she'd worn for so long was about to slip, and Guilherme would pay dearly for his arrogance. Back at the apartment, Brenda didn't sleep. Sitting in the living room, her laptop open, she reviewed her finances, the receipts, the statements. Each document was proof of her strength, of everything Guilherme ignored. The humiliation at dinner still stung, but now it fueled her determination. She remembered every time he had belittled her, every comment disguised as a joke. "You wouldn't do anything without me," he'd say. But the truth was the opposite. Brenda was the propeller, and he was the parasite. The shame she felt in front of her friends became fuel. She imagined their faces when they learned the truth. Guilherme thought he controlled her, but he had no idea who she really was. Brenda began organizing her next steps, each one calculated with the precision of her spreadsheets. Dinner had been the trigger, but the explosion would be hers, and she would make sure everyone saw it. The following days were a silent torture. Guilherme acted as if nothing had changed, but Brenda was different. She responded in monosyllables, her eyes cold and distant. He noticed, but didn't care enough to ask. At work, Brenda shone even brighter, securing contracts that increased her income. But at home she was a shadow, scheming in secret. The humiliation at dinner haunted her, but also freed her. She no longer needed his approval, nor the friends who laughed. Each night she revised her plan, imagining the moment Guilherme would face the truth. Anger kept her focused, but also made her question. Why had she waited so long? The answer was clear. She wanted his downfall to be unforgettable. Brenda didn't just want out of the marriage, she wanted him to feel the weight of her words. The stage was being set, and she would be the protagonist. The humiliation at dinner changed everything. Brenda realized she could no longer live under Guilherme's contempt. Every time she thought of her friends' laughter, their indifference, she felt a mixture of pain and fury, but fury prevailed. She began gathering evidence, bank statements, receipts, everything that proved she was the one supporting the household. Guilherme suspected nothing, continuing his provocations, oblivious to the approaching storm. Brenda knew the truth would be her weapon, but she needed the perfect moment. She imagined the shock in his eyes, the awkward silence of his friends. Dinner had been the breaking point, the moment she decided she would no longer be the victim. Her patience, once her prison, was now her strength. Brenda was ready to show her true colors, and Guilherme, unbeknownst to him, was heading toward the biggest mistake of his life. The dinner was lively until Guilherme crossed the line again. With a glass of wine in hand, he laughed out loud and told his friends, "Brenda's only with me because she has nowhere to fall." The air grew heavy. Everyone looked at her, waiting for her to swallow yet another humiliation. But something in Brenda snapped. She stood up, her heart pounding, and spoke with a chilling calm. "You're wrong, Guilherme. I pay everything. The rent, the bills, even this dinner. Everything comes out of my own pocket." The silence was deafening. His friends, open-mouthed, exchanged glances. Guilherme tried to laugh, but his voice faltered. Brenda continued firmly, "I want a divorce. Now." Each word was a blow, and his face went from arrogance to panic. Years of secrecy, of supporting the household alone, exploded at that table. Brenda was no longer the invisible wife. She was the strength he'd never seen, and now everyone knew. Brenda's revelation changed the mood of the dinner. The friends, who had previously laughed at Guilherme's jokes, now whispered awkwardly. He tried to defend himself, stammering something about exaggeration, but no one believed him. Brenda, in a firm voice, listed the bills she paid. Electricity, internet, even the new clothes he showed off. Every detail was proof of her independence and his failure. She threw the $16,000 she earned in his face, a number that made him swallow hard. His friends looked at the floor, embarrassed for having laughed at her. Brenda felt the weight of years of silence lifting. The humiliation she had suffered there, minutes before, was now his. She grabbed her coat and announced, "I don't need you, Guilherme, I never have." The shock in his eyes was all she needed to see. For the first time, Brenda felt in control. Divorce wasn't just a decision, it was her declared liberation. In the car, the silence was different. Guilherme drove, his face flushed, not daring to face her. Brenda stared out the window, her heart light but still trembling with adrenaline. She had planned this moment for weeks, but courage came on impulse. Every word she had said at the table echoed in her mind, a victory over years of contempt. He tried to speak, mumble something about talking at home, but she cut him off. No talking. It's over. The strength in her own voice surprised her. She was no longer the woman who hid behind fake smiles. Friends who had witnessed everything were already sending shocked messages, apologizing, but Brenda didn't need them. The truth, now exposed, was her armor. Guilherme for the first time seemed small. Dinner had marked the end of an era. Brenda knew the road ahead would be hard, but she was ready. The days after the dinner were a whirlwind. Guilherme tried to downplay what had happened, telling his friends that Brenda had overreacted and that everything would work out, but she didn't back down. At work, Brenda shone even brighter, closing deals with renewed energy. At home, she began sorting through her things, ignoring Guilherme's stares. He alternated between anger and pleading, but nothing made her hesitate. The revelation at the dinner wasn't just about money, it was about power. Brenda had shown everyone who truly supported the household, and the shame was now his. She hired a lawyer, filed for divorce, and began planning her new life. Each step was an affirmation of her strength. Guilherme, stunned, realized too late that the woman he'd underestimated was the foundation of everything. Brenda didn't look back. The dinner had been the stage for her turning point, and she would never be invisible again. Brenda's truthful words echoed beyond the dinner table. Mutual friends began to treat her with respect, some even with admiration. Guilherme, on the other hand, faced judgmental looks. He tried to maintain the facade of a confident man, but embarrassment followed him. Brenda, meanwhile, felt a freedom she hadn't known in years. Each signature on the divorce papers was a step toward total independence. She no longer needed to hide her income, her strength, her truth. The moment at dinner was more than a revelation. It was a declaration of war against the contempt she had suffered. Guilherme, now exposed, had no way to defend himself. Brenda knew the battle was not won, but the first victory was hers. The woman he called poor had shown the world who she truly was, and this was only the beginning of her ascension. Brenda didn't look back after dinner. Guilherme's public humiliation and his explosive revelation marked the end of her patience. The next day she hired a lawyer and filed for divorce, driven by a determination that made her feel alive again. Guilherme, stunned, tried to talk to her, but Brenda ignored him with a coldness he'd never seen before. "Let's talk, it was a misunderstanding," he insisted, but his words bounced off the wall she'd built. Brenda organized her things in the apartment, separating what was hers while he watched helplessly. Mutual friends who witnessed the scene at dinner began texting, some apologizing, others trying to defend Guilherme. She didn't respond. Her mind was focused, getting out of that marriage, that prison. Each step in the separation process was a victory. Guilherme, for the first time, felt the ground slipping from under his feet. Brenda, however, was just beginning to rebuild her life. Guilherme couldn't accept reality. He showed up at home with empty promises, talking about changes and new beginnings. Brenda listened, but her eyes never wavered. She knew his desperation wasn't out of love, but out of fear of losing the comfort she provided. He tried using friends as intermediaries, sending messages like, "He's sorry, give him a chance." Brenda deleted each one without responding. At work, she dedicated herself even more, signing contracts that reinforced her financial independence. At home, she packed up her clothes, books, and memories, leaving behind everything that connected her to him. The lawyer guided her precisely, and Brenda followed each step with a clarity that surprised her. Guilherme, meanwhile, realized his words no longer held power. The woman he'd underestimated was now an unstoppable force. His every attempt at reconciliation was a reminder of his own weakness. Brenda wouldn't budge, and that terrified him. Guilherme's insistence began to change tone. He went from pleading to manipulative attempts, telling his friends that Brenda was being unfair and that he deserved a chance. Some believed him, but most after dinner saw the truth. Brenda, meanwhile, remained focused on the divorce. She temporarily moved into an apartment, leaving the one they shared. The new space, small but hers, was like a breath of freedom. Guilherme tried to visit her, bringing cheap flowers and a rehearsed speech. "You can't throw everything away," he said, his voice trembling. Brenda stared at him coldly. "You threw it away, not me." The rejection disarmed him. He returned to his friends, asking them to intercede, but even they were beginning to distance themselves. Brenda at work received praise for her renewed energy. The separation process was progressing, and she felt the weight of the years dissipating. Guilherme now was just an echo of a past she was leaving behind. The friends who had once laughed at Guilherme's jokes now hesitated. Some tried to approach Brenda, curious about her income, her strength. She kept everyone at a distance, focused on herself. Guilherme, desperate, spread stories that Brenda had abandoned him and that he was the victim. But the truth about the dinner had already spread. He lost credibility, while Brenda gained respect. At the office, she negotiated new contracts, each one a brick in the construction of her new life. The lawyer informed her that the divorce was progressing smoothly, as Guilherme had no way to contest it. He tried calling, texting, even showing up at the apartment, but Brenda blocked him. Her determination was a wall. His every attempt was a reminder of her powerlessness. Brenda took no pleasure in his downfall, but in her own rise. The separation process was not just legal, it was proof that she would never again be the invisible woman he had humiliated. Guilherme was lost. Without Brenda's financial support, he was facing late payments he hadn't even noticed before. His friends, tired of his complaints, began to drift away. Brenda, meanwhile, organized her new routine in the apartment, decorating the space with touches of her personality. She felt light, as if a weight had been lifted from years. The lawyer confirmed that the divorce would be finalized soon, and she began planning for the future. Travel, investments, a life that was her own. Guilherme tried one last trick, sending a letter full of promises, but Brenda threw it away without reading it. Her resolve was unshakable. She didn't need false regrets or a man who only valued her when he lost. Dinner had been the trigger, but the divorce was liberation. Brenda walked forward, while Guilherme sank into the void he had created. His strength, now visible, was what guided her. Brenda flourished while Guilherme crumbled. Freed from the weight of her marriage, she threw herself into her work with an energy that surprised even her colleagues. As a financial consultant, she secured contracts with major companies, doubling her income to over $32,000 per month. Each signature was proof of her competence, a reminder that she never needed him. Meanwhile, Guilherme faced chaos. Without Brenda's financial support, he couldn't pay the bills on the apartment she'd left behind. Worse, his arrogant attitude at work cost him his job. He, who once laughed at her, now asked favors from friends who no longer took him seriously. Brenda, in her apartment, decorated the space with plants and paintings, building a home that reflected her new freedom. The contrast was stark. She rose, he fell. Guilherme began to feel the weight of his choices, but Brenda didn't look back. His life was now hers, and she was masterfully shaping it. At the office, Brenda was a force of nature. Clients praised her ability to turn crises into opportunities, and her reputation grew. She worked late, not out of necessity, but out of passion. Each new contract was a step toward the life she'd dreamed of. Meanwhile, Guilherme was sinking. Jobless, he sold belongings to cover expenses, but the money ran out quickly. Friends who once fawned over him now avoided him, tired of his complaints. He tried to contact Brenda, sending messages that she ignored. "You already have what you wanted, leave me alone," he wrote, as if she were the villain. But Brenda felt no guilt. She knew he was reaping what he sowed. In the apartment, she opened a bottle of wine to celebrate a new client, while Guilherme faced the silence of an empty apartment. The irony was sweet. The man who had called her poor now depended on crumbs while she built an empire. Brenda's prosperity was more than financial. It was personal. She began investing in herself, taking leadership courses and networking with executives. Her confidence, once stifled by Guilherme, now shone. At work, she led meetings with a captivating confidence. Meanwhile, Guilherme faced humiliations. He tried to find a new job, but his reputation preceded him. Friends at dinner who knew the truth spread the story. Brenda was the driving force behind it all. He was now seen as the parasite. Desperate, Guilherme called acquaintances, asking for loans, but received only excuses. Brenda, oblivious to his plight, closed a deal that would elevate her to a new level. Her apartment, once temporary, became a true home, with touches of her in every corner. The contrast between them was a mirror. She, free and prosperous, he, trapped by his own lies. Brenda knew this was only the beginning. News about Brenda spread quickly. Colleagues invited her to events and clients recommended her for larger projects. Her double income allowed for smart investments, a robust savings account, plans for a home of her own. Guilherme, on the other hand, faced eviction. Unable to pay his rent, he received notices that left him panicked. He tried to blame Brenda, telling his few remaining friends that she had abandoned him. But the truth was clear. He had never appreciated her. Brenda, meanwhile, was receiving an award at work for her excellence. The applause-filled ceremony was the opposite of the humiliating dinner. She smiled, knowing that each achievement was a response to the past. Guilherme now was but a shadow in her story. His downfall was the result of his actions, while her rise was the fruit of her strength. Brenda had no need for revenge. Her life now was the greatest proof of her victory. The distance between Brenda and Guilherme grew like a chasm. She traveled for work, exploring new cities and expanding her network. Her schedule was full, her life vibrant. Guilherme, meanwhile, was living off odd jobs, sleeping on a friend's couch. He heard rumors of Brenda's success, and each piece of news was a blow. He tried to text her asking to talk, but she had blocked him months ago. Brenda felt no anger, only relief. Her income, now a reflection of her talent, opened doors she never imagined. She planned for the future, a solo trip, perhaps a new business. Guilherme, stuck in the past, had no way to reach her. The man who had humiliated her was now irrelevant. Brenda, with each signed contract, rewrote her story. Her success was the justice he never expected, and she savored every moment of this new life. Guilherme showed up at Brenda's apartment with a bouquet of cheap flowers, his face forced into a rueful smile. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice trembling. Brenda stared at him, the door ajar, not inviting him in. The flowers, wilted like his promises, didn't move her. "I messed up, Brenda. Let's try again," he insisted, but her eyes saw beyond. She knew his regret wasn't about love, but about the comfort he'd lost. Without her income, he faced eviction and humiliation. Brenda, now earning $32,000 a month, didn't need the facade he offered. "You miss the money, not me," she said, her voice sharp as a blade. His face fell, the mask of remorse slipping. She closed the door, leaving him with the flowers in his hand. Guilherme, who had called her a gold digger, now begged for what she had built alone. Brenda felt the weight of the past dissolve. Her strength was greater than his pleas. Days later, Guilherme tried again. He left a note in the apartment, filled with rehearsed phrases about love and second chances. Brenda read it, but threw the paper in the trash. His every attempt was proof of his weakness, not his affection. She remembered the nights he humiliated her, the laughter of his friends at dinner. Now free, she decorated her apartment with touches of his personality while he slept on a friend's couch. At work, Brenda closed deals that elevated her to a new level. Guilherme, jobless, asked for favors no one wanted. He tried calling, but she blocked him. "You don't understand what I lost," he wrote in a message that never reached her. But Brenda understood. He had lost control, comfort, the illusion of superiority. She, on the other hand, had gained everything she deserved. The wilted flowers were a symbol of a past she no longer wanted. Guilherme didn't give up easily, but each attempt was more pathetic. He showed up at her building, waiting in the lobby, with another bouquet and a memorized speech. "I've changed, Brenda, give me a chance," he said, but his voice sounded hollow. She came downstairs, not for him, but to end this. "You never saw me," she replied, her eyes steady. "You wanted a maid, not a wife." He tried to argue, but his words died under her gaze. Brenda knew his desperation stemmed from his empty bank account, not his heart. She returned to the apartment, where her new life blossomed. Meetings, trips, projects. Guilherme, meanwhile, faced the reality of his own ruin. His friends, who had once supported him, now commented on Brenda's success. She didn't need flowers or promises. Her independence was her greatest trophy, and Guilherme, with his wilted bouquet, was just a shadow of his past. Guilherme's attempts began to thin out. He sent messages through friends, asking them to intervene, but no one wanted to get involved. Brenda, meanwhile, shone at work. An important client invited her to a networking event where she was praised for her strategic vision. Her income, now doubled, allowed for bigger plans, a home of her own, an international trip. Guilherme, on the other hand, struggled to pay off debts. He tried to approach Brenda at a cafe she frequented, but she ignored him, as if he were a stranger. "You're being cruel," he said, trying to sound hurt. "What you did to me was cruel," she retorted without hesitation. The contrast was clear. Brenda was building a vibrant future, while Guilherme reaped the emptiness of his choices. The flowers he brought withered in the trash, as did his attempts. Brenda knew the game had changed, and she was the one making the rules now. Guilherme's desperation was palpable, but Brenda wouldn't give in. He tried one last tactic, sending a long email speaking of past mistakes and a future together. She didn't even open it. Her life now was a reflection of her strength, an apartment that was her sanctuary, a career that elevated her, a confidence he'd never known. Guilherme, homeless and without allies, faced the reality he'd created. Brenda, on the other hand, received invitations to lectures where her story began to inspire. She knew his regret was for the loss of comfort, not love. His every attempt was a confirmation of his victory. She didn't need flowers or words. She needed only herself. Guilherme now was just an echo as Brenda walked toward a future he could never touch. His final rejection was silent, but it said it all. She was free and he was the past. Brenda breathed freedom for the first time in years. With her divorce finalized, she left behind the weight of Guilherme's contempt and embraced a new version of herself. She moved to a larger apartment, decorated with vibrant colors that reflected her soul. She invested in herself. She took self-development courses, signed up for dance lessons, and planned her first solo trip. Paris, a long-time dream, became a reality with a ticket purchased with her $32,000 monthly income. Far from Guilherme's control, Brenda rediscovered who she was, a strong, creative, and vibrant woman. Every step was a celebration of her independence. At work, she shone, leading projects that put her on the radar of major companies. The past, with its humiliations, seemed distant. Brenda wasn't just surviving, she was flourishing. Guilherme, meanwhile, was just a faded memory. Her new life was a cry for freedom, and she didn't look back. The trip to Paris was transformative. Brenda walked the streets of Montmartre, feeling the wind on her face, free from the criticism that held her back. She visited museums, drank coffee in bistros, and jotted down ideas for new projects. For the first time, there was no one to judge or belittle her. In Brazil, her colleagues followed her photos on social media, praising her courage. Brenda posted with pride, showing the world the woman who had always been there, hidden beneath the weight of her marriage. Her confidence attracted opportunities. An international client invited her to do a consulting job in London. She accepted, knowing her life was now limitless. Guilherme, meanwhile, struggled to pay off debts, living in a rented room. The irony was clear. The woman he had called poor was now living a dream he could never achieve. Brenda didn't feel anger. She felt peace. Each new step took her away from the past and closer to who she truly was. Back in Brazil, Brenda immersed herself in new hobbies. She enrolled in painting classes, where her canvases expressed the emotions she had held back for years. She also began meditating, finding balance after so much chaos. At work, her reputation grew. She was invited to networking events where her story inspired. Women approached her, asking how she had turned things around. Brenda smiled, sharing her journey without mentioning Guilherme. He didn't deserve a place in her narrative. Meanwhile, he faced the emptiness of his new reality without friends or support. Brenda, with her income doubled, planned to buy a beachfront house, a symbol of her achievement. Every choice she made was an act of self-love. The control Guilherme had exerted over her was a distant shadow. Brenda was rediscovering her voice, her strength, her identity, and no one could take them away again. The new Brenda drew admiring glances. At work, she led with a confidence that captivated entire teams. Outside the office, she tried things she'd never dared: rock climbing, dinners with new friends, nights of laughter without fear of judgment. Her trip to Paris had inspired her to plan another, perhaps to Italy. Her income afforded these luxuries, but the true treasure was her freedom. She looked in the mirror and saw a woman who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Guilherme, meanwhile, sank into his own irrelevance. Rumors said he was trying to start over, but no one believed his promises. Brenda, oblivious to him, built a life that reflected her dreams. Every painting she painted, every trip she planned, was an affirmation of who she was. The past no longer defined her. Brenda was finally the protagonist of her own story. Brenda's rediscovery was an ongoing process. She began keeping a journal, recording her thoughts and dreams, something she had never done in her marriage. Each page was a celebration of her independence. At work, she received offers to lead international projects, and her confidence led her to take on greater challenges. Her house, now a true home, was full of life: plants, books, memories of her travels. Guilherme, lost in his own ruin, no longer held space in her mind. She overheard that he was trying for a new job, but failing. This didn't cheer her. It simply didn't matter. Brenda lived for herself, not for his downfall. Her identity, once erased by his control, now shone through in every choice. Paris had been just the beginning. The world was hers. Brenda knew her story was just beginning, and she would write it her way. Brenda received the invitation with a mixture of surprise and pride to speak at an event for women entrepreneurs. The organization had heard about her journey, how she transformed pain into power. On stage, under the spotlight, she looked out at the audience full of attentive faces. "I was once invisible," she began, her voice firm but charged with emotion. She told her story, her oppressive marriage, Guilherme's humiliations, the secret of her income that supported everything. The audience listened in silence, some women with tears in their eyes. Brenda spoke about the dinner, the moment she revealed the truth and the freedom that came after. "No one defines your worth but you," she said, and the audience erupted in applause. Her story wasn't just about revenge, it was about self-love. Offstage, women approached, sharing their own struggles. Brenda, who once hid, was now a light for others. Her voice, silenced for years, echoed powerfully. Preparations for the talk were intense. Brenda reviewed her story, choosing each word carefully. She didn't just want to recount the past, she wanted to inspire. She wrote about her years under Guilherme's control, about how she hid her income of $16,000, then $32,000, to keep the peace. On stage, she transformed this pain into a lesson. "I kept quiet out of fear, but I learned that silence can be a weapon," she said, as the audience took note of her words. Women of all ages saw themselves in her, some trapped in abusive relationships, others fighting for independence. Brenda shared how divorce and travel had redefined her. "You don't have to wait for permission to shine," she affirmed. The impact was immediate. Social media flooded with posts about her speech. Guilherme, in his world of debt, was irrelevant. Brenda, now, was a beacon. Her story resonated, showing that overcoming obstacles is the greatest act of courage. After the talk, Brenda was surrounded by women seeking advice. One young woman with tears in her eyes said, "You gave me the strength to leave a relationship like yours." Brenda hugged her, feeling the weight of her new responsibility. She was no longer just a consultant, she was a voice. At the event, organizers invited her to other meetings, seeing in her a natural leader. Brenda accepted, planning workshops to help women manage their finances and self-esteem. Her now sturdy income financed these projects. She thought of Paris, of the canvases she painted, of the life she had built. Guilherme, meanwhile, sank into his irrelevance, unable to pay rent. The irony was clear. The woman he had humiliated now inspired crowds. Brenda didn't talk about him in the talk. He didn't deserve the stage. Her story was about her, about being reborn. Every round of applause was proof that she had won, not only for herself, but for all who listened. The talk's impact surpassed expectations. Videos of her speech went viral, with excerpts shared by women in online groups. "Have you ever been invisible?" became a motto for many. Brenda received messages from strangers thanking her for showing them it was possible to start over. She began planning a book, something that would immortalize her journey and help others. At work, her reputation as a consultant was only growing, but the talk elevated her to a new level. She was a reference for overcoming obstacles. Guilherme, lost in his own ruin, heard about her success. The news hit him like a blow, but Brenda neither knew nor cared. Her life was now bigger than the past. She visited exhibitions, planned new trips, lived with ease. The event had been a milestone not only for her, but for all who saw her as a mirror. Brenda knew her voice was now reaching hearts she never imagined. Brenda's transformation inspired even those who knew her from afar. Co-workers, who previously saw only a competent consultant, now admired her courage. She began mentoring women in the office, sharing career and self-esteem tips. At the next event, her talk was packed, with people lining up to hear her. She spoke passionately but without rancor, focusing on the strength she found within herself. "Self-love is the greatest revenge," she said, and the audience gave a standing ovation. Brenda didn't need Guilherme to feel complete. She was enough. He, meanwhile, was working odd jobs, aimless. The distance between them was a chasm. She, on stage, illuminated. He, in the shadows, forgotten. Every woman Brenda inspired was proof that her journey had been worthwhile. Her story was no longer hers alone. It belonged to all who dared to dream. Brenda was now a symbol of resilience and freedom. Brenda was at her peak when she received the offer that would change everything. A multinational company, impressed by her speaking engagements and reputation as a consultant, offered her the leadership of a strategic team. The position came with an even higher salary and the chance to shape the future of an entire division. Brenda accepted, feeling that every step of her journey, from Guilherme's humiliation to his liberation, had prepared her for this. She moved into a beachfront house, a dream come true with her monthly income of $32,000. In her new role, she led with empathy and firmness, inspiring her team to achieve extraordinary results. Her happiness was palpable. She smiled easily, painted vibrant canvases, and planned new trips. Guilherme, meanwhile, lived in the shadows, unable to find his feet. Brenda didn't think about him. Her life was a legacy of overcoming obstacles. Every decision she made was a brick in her new story. She was no longer the invisible woman. She was a leader, confident and fulfilled. In her new role, Brenda transformed challenges into opportunities. Her team admired her, not only for her competence but for the story she told in moments of pause. The woman who left an oppressive marriage to build an empire. She mentored young professionals, especially women, teaching them to value their potential. Her seaside home, with its large windows and the sound of the waves, was her refuge. Brenda hosted dinners with friends, laughed loudly, and lived fearlessly. Her income, now even larger, funded personal projects. A book about her journey, workshops for women. Guilherme, lost in low-paying jobs, heard about her success. The news gnawed at him, but Brenda neither knew nor cared. Her life was full. Trips to Rome, exhibitions of her paintings, applause at lectures. She was building a legacy, not only for herself, but for all who saw her as an inspiration. The past was but a footnote in her story of triumph. Brenda's leadership extended beyond the office. She founded a mentoring program for female entrepreneurs, sharing lessons on finance and self-esteem. Her story, now published in articles and shared at events, touched hearts. Women wrote, thanking her for showing them it was possible to start over. Brenda, with her home filled with light and her schedule full of dreams, felt complete. She was traveling now to Italy, where she walked through vineyards and planned her book. Guilherme, meanwhile, faced the loneliness of a rented room without friends or a future. The irony was clear. The woman he had called poor was now an icon, while he faded into his own insignificance. Brenda didn't need revenge. Her happiness was the greatest answer. Every achievement, every smile was proof of her strength. She hadn't just survived. She had created a legacy that would echo for generations. Brenda's new phase was a reflection of her resilience. At work, her team was hitting targets, and she was invited to international conferences. Outside the office, she ran on the beach, painted at dawn, and lived with a lightness she'd never known. Her beachfront home was a sanctuary where she welcomed friends and planned for the future. The book she was writing, almost finished, recounted her journey without mentioning Guilherme. He didn't deserve space. Women who read preliminary excerpts were moved, seeing in it a mirror of their own struggles. Brenda also supported social causes, donating part of her income to empowerment programs. Guilherme, trapped in his ruin, was a distant echo. Brenda's life was now a symphony of achievements. Each step she took reinforced her independence. She was no longer defined by the past, but by the impact she made. Her story inspired and her legacy began to take shape. Brenda gazed at the horizon, the sea reflecting her peace. Her leadership at the company had placed her at a level she never imagined. She received emails from women who, inspired by her talk, changed their lives. Her recently published book sold out in pre-orders. In her beachfront house, she wrote, painted, and dreamed. Guilherme, now a forgotten figure, lived on favors, unable to get back on his feet. Brenda didn't feel joy in his downfall, but rather in her own rise. Each achievement, the position, the house, the book, was a brick in her legacy. She was happy, not because she defeated Guilherme, but because she defeated herself. Her story, told on stage and in print, inspired thousands. Morale of the story: true revenge is building a life so great that the past becomes irrelevant. Brenda showed that self-love and determination create lasting legacies. What did you think of the story? Leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of overcoming adversity. What would you do in Brenda's place? Tell us. See you in the next video.